Welcome to Saint of the Day. Today, July 16th, the Church celebrates Our Lady of Mount Carmel, also called Our Lady of the Scapular. This devotion traces back to Mount Carmel, in Israel, where in the 9th century before Christ the prophet Elijah challenged the priests of the pagan god Baal and proved the supremacy of the one true God. By the late 12th century, Christian hermits had settled in the caves of that mountain, living in contemplation and poverty under Mary's protection. As Islamic forces advanced through the Holy Land, the Carmelites migrated to Europe and faced a serious crisis. Without final approval from the Church, the young order risked disappearing altogether. It was at that moment, tradition tells us, that on the night of July 16, 1251, the Virgin Mary appeared to the Prior General, St. Simon Stock, in Aylesford, England, surrounded by angels, and handed him the brown scapular, a sign of consecration and maternal protection for anyone who wore it while living a life of faith. The scapular, originally a practical piece worn over the shoulders by monks, became one of the most widespread sacramentals in the Church, a symbol of belonging to Mary, not a magic charm. The devotion spread across the whole world. Our Lady of Mount Carmel is patroness of Chile and Bolivia, protector of sailors and fishermen, and intercessor for the souls in purgatory. From the Carmelite order came some of the Church's greatest saints, like Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross, and Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. Also on this day, the Church honors Saint Bartholomew of the Martyrs, the holy Archbishop of Braga. Born Bartolomeu Fernandes in 1514, in Lisbon, he joined the Dominican Order while still young, taking the name of the parish where he had been baptized. After decades teaching philosophy and theology, he was elected Archbishop of Braga in 1559, against his own will, purely out of obedience to his superiors. During the final sessions of the Council of Trent, he became one of the strongest defenders of church reform, demanding an end to episcopal privilege, mandatory residence of bishops in their own diocese, and serious formation for the clergy, directly influencing Saint Charles Borromeo, who took him as a spiritual model. But it was in pastoral practice that His Holiness shone brightest. He visited more than 1,260 parishes riding only a humble donkey, without any luxury. In the winter of 1570, when a devastating plague struck Braga, Bartholomew refused to flee as so many rulers did. He spent every penny of his own money and the diocese's resources to set up field hospitals, tend to the sick, and give the last sacraments to the dying. When criticized for spending too much on the poor, he answered, "You will never see me so reckless in spending, on the idle, what I could use to give life to the poor." He resigned in 1582, exhausted, and died on July 16, 1590. He was canonized by Pope Francis in 2019, and is today the patron of catechists in Portugal. On this same day, the Church also remembers the first martyrs born on Brazilian soil, Saints André de Soveral, Domingos Carvalho, and their companions. André de Soveral was born around 1572 on the coast of São Paulo, likely a student of Saint José de Anchieta. After serving as a Jesuit missionary, he became a secular priest and took charge of the parish of Our Lady of the Candles, at the Cunha sugar mill, in what is now Rio Grande do Norte, Brazil. The region, strategic for its sugarcane production, drew the military interest of the Dutch West India Company, which imposed harsh restrictions on Catholic worship. On Sunday, July 16, 1645, about 69 faithful gathered in the chapel for Mass, unarmed in obedience to Dutch laws. While Father André, already in his 70s, celebrated the Mass, Dutch troops and allied indigenous warriors locked the doors of the church and began a massacre. Recognizing that he was about to die for his faith, Father André urged his parishioners to accept martyrdom and forgive their attackers, crying out his final words, "Long live the most blessed sacrament." Domingos Carvalho, a lay leader of the community, fell beside the priest and dozens of other faithful. They were beatified in 2000 and canonized in 2017 by Pope Francis, becoming the first saints born or martyred on Brazilian soil, and patrons of Rio Grande do Norte. Still on July 16, we remember Saint Mary Magdalen Postel, born Julie Françoise Catherine Postel in 1756, in Normandy, France. By age 18, she was already running a school for girls in Barfla. When the French Revolution shut down religious institutions and began hunting down priests who refused to swear allegiance to the new regime, Julie organized local Catholic resistance. She turned the empty space beneath her own staircase into a secret chapel, where she hid dozens of fugitive priests and kept the sacraments alive. Her reputation for holiness and discretion was so great that the local bishop granted her an extraordinary permission for a laywoman to keep the Blessed Sacrament in her own home and carry it hidden in her clothing to bring communion to the sick and dying, even under the watch of revolutionary guards. When the Concordat of 1801 brought a measure of religious peace to France, Julie returned to her calling as an educator. In 1807, at age 52, she took religious vows, adopted the name Mary Magdalen, and founded the Congregation of the Sisters of the Christian Schools of Mercy, dedicated to teaching poor girls and caring for orphans. The community's earliest years were marked by absolute poverty, living in a barn next to the school. She died on July 16, 1846, nearly 100 years old, and was canonized in 1925. In a very different way, the Church also celebrates today an ancient bishop and martyr, Saint Athenogenes of Sebaste. He lived in a small rural monastery with 10 disciples, known for his extraordinary compassion. Tradition even says wild animals grew fond of him. Around the year 305, during the persecution of Emperor Diocletian, the Roman magistrate Philomachus arrived in Sebaste demanding that Christians offer sacrifice to the pagan gods. Athenogenes and his 10 disciples flatly refused to deny their faith, and were condemned to be burned alive. What made his martyrdom unforgettable was not just his courage before the flames, but his serenity. According to the testimony of Saint Basil the Great, one of the great doctors of the Church, Athenogenes showed no fear of the fire at all. Instead, he sang out a joyful hymn praising Christ as the true light. That hymn, known as the Phos Hilaron, O Gladsome Light, is recognized today as the oldest Christian hymn outside the Bible, still in continuous use, still sung at Vespers in Eastern churches. His final words, preserved in the liturgy, read, O gladsome light of the holy glory of the immortal Father, it is fitting at all times that you be praised with joyful voices. He is venerated as one of the great theologian martyrs of the early Church. On this same day, the Church honors 2 very different men who died together for the same faith, Blessed John Sugar and Robert Grissold, the martyrs of Warwick. John Sugar was born in England around 1558 and, unlike most English Catholic martyrs, began his religious life as an ordained minister of the Church of England. Moved by theological doubts, he abandoned Protestantism, crossed the sea to France, and was ordained a Catholic priest at the English College of Douai, knowing full well that returning to England could cost him his life under the harsh penal laws of King James I. Robert Grissold, a simple, unmarried farmer, became his guide and escort along the watched roads of Warwickshire. On July 8, 1603, the two were arrested on a road, ironically, by a patrol that included Grissold's own cousin. Brought to trial, they were offered immediate pardon if they agreed to attend, just once, an Anglican service. They refused without hesitation. On July 16, 1604, they were led to execution in Warwick. Encouraging the crowd, Father Sugar said, "Rejoice, for though I am to have a bitter supper, I trust in Jesus Christ to have a sweeter supper." Grissold, urged to step away from the mud dragging down his condemned companion, answered, "I did not follow him this far to abandon him now for a little mud." They were beatified by Pope John Paul II in 1987. In a very different way, the Church remembers today a Chinese laywoman, catechist, and mother, Saint Teresa Zhang Hezhi, of the village of Zhangjiaji, in Hebei Province, China. During the Boxer Rebellion, a nationalist uprising that saw the destruction of Christianity and everything foreign as China's only path to salvation, Chinese Christians were hunted down and massacred by the thousands. On July 16, 1900, Teresa was captured by the insurgents and dragged to the courtyard of a local temple, where the militia demanded she renounce her faith in Christ and worship local deities to save her life and the lives of her children. Faced with her firm refusal to commit apostasy, her captors tied her to a tree and ran her through with spears, killing her 2 sons beside her in the same brutal way. Afterward, they set fire to the family's home, trying to erase every trace of her existence, but her husband later managed to recover her remains. Teresa is among the 120 martyrs of China, canonized by Pope John Paul II in the year 2000. Her story is proof that the Christian faith had been truly embraced by the Chinese countryside, not merely imposed from abroad. She gave her life, and her children's lives, rather than deny Christ. Still today, the Church celebrates a hermit and martyr from the far edge of Europe, Saint Helier of Jersey. Born in the early 6th century in Tongres, in modern-day Belgium, to pagan parents, he was raised in the Christian faith by the hermit Cunibert, who was later murdered by Helier's own intolerant father. The young man fled to the coast of Gaul in search of a monastic life, and, under the guidance of Abbot Saint Marculf, was sent as a missionary to a then sparsely populated island in the English Channel, known today as Jersey, whose people lived under the constant terror of pirate raids. Helier built his hermitage on a small rock battered by the tides, and his holiness was joined to a very concrete service to the people. From his privileged position over the sea, he could spot invading fleets before they reached the shore, and would signal to the fishing village in time for them to flee into the marshes, giving rise to the local tradition of calling dark clouds on the horizon Saint Helier's sails. After about 15 years of ascetic life and protective vigilance, around the year 555, a fresh wave of pirates reached his rock. Given the chance to flee, Helier chose to remain in prayer, and was beheaded by the raiders, enraged by his warnings. To this day, the coat of arms of the town of Saint Helier, capital of Jersey, bears 2 crossed axes in his memory. In a very different way, the Church also remembers today a young enslaved woman who never bent her faith, Saint Julia of Carthage, also venerated as Saint Julia of Corsica. Born into a wealthy Christian family in Carthage, in North Africa, she lost her freedom when the city fell to the Vandals in the 5th century. Sold as a slave in the marketplace, she was bought by a pagan Syrian merchant named Eusebius. Even in captivity, Julia kept her faith and spiritual discipline fully intact, and her dedication to her work earned her the respect and a rare measure of religious tolerance from her master. The final proof of her faithfulness came during a trading voyage that made port in Corsica, where the local population was celebrating a great pagan festival. While the merchant Eusebius joined in the festivities, Julia flatly refused to go ashore and take part in the idolatrous rites. The local leader, angered by a slave defying the island's customs, demanded that Eusebius free her so she could be sacrificed. Unable to protect her, drunk from the celebration, the merchant gave in, and the crowd, gripped by pagan fanaticism, brutally tortured Julia before crucifying her on the coast. Monks from a neighboring island later recovered her body. She is venerated today as the principal patroness of Corsica and of many cities across northern Italy. And closing today's list, the Church celebrates a princess who traded a royal crown for a life among the poor, Blessed Irmengard of Chiemsee. Born around the year 832, she was a great-granddaughter of Charlemagne and the daughter of King Louis the German, ruler of Bavaria. At a time when princesses were used as pieces in political marriage alliances, Irmengard refused any arranged marriage and chose religious life instead, entrusted by her own father to the care of a convent. She first governed the Augustinian community of Bochum am Fadersee, and was later placed in charge of the Benedictine Abbey of Frauenworth, built on a small island on Lake Chiemsee, in Bavaria. There, instead of using the privileges of her royal blood for her own comfort, Irmengard devoted the abbey's resources to caring for the poor and sick peasants who gathered along the lake's shores, building shelters to treat infectious diseases. That extreme self-giving, combined with a life of severe fasting, wore down her own health. She died at only 33 years old, on July 16, 866. Her relics remained in the island church, and her reputation for intercession endured for centuries until her formal beatification in 1928. Curiously, in Bavarian folklore, Irmengard came to be invoked by women hoping to conceive or facing difficult pregnancies, a touching paradox for a virgin who renounced physical motherhood for a complete gift of herself to God. And if any of these 10 saints touched your heart today, follow along here on Saint of the Day, comment asking for the intercession of one of them for someone you love, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today, because every share like that is, truly, a small act of evangelization. The full prayer to each of today's saints is in the description of the video.